The Windows command prompt. My old friend, you have not aged well. This is a relic from another era, and now it's had an upgrade. Welcome to the Windows Terminal. Welcome back to the Pro Tech Show. Thanks to Shake for this video suggestion. If you have any ideas you'd like me to cover, then feel free to drop them in the comments below. The Windows command prompt we all know hasn't changed for decades, and compared to alternatives, it kind of sucks. The thing is, it actually sucks by design. Yes, they made it rubbish on purpose. If you already know the difference between a terminal and a shell, and you're impatient to see the shiny things, then I'll add timestamps so you can go and skip ahead. But don't blame me if you do that and get confused. Those of us who've been around the block a bit may have heard the Windows command prompt referred to as the DOS prompt. It isn't a DOS prompt, but it does look like one. DOS is the Microsoft operating system that existed before Windows. It was a command line operating system. You typed in text and the computer responded with text. That's as fancy as it got. Now, Windows has matured quite a lot since then, and most people don't interact with a command line anymore. That's most normal people anyway. IT admins use it a ton because it's great for automation. In a modern Windows operating system, that command line interface is provided by the Windows command prompt. But why is it still so old? One of the primary reasons it exists is for backward compatibility. A lot of places have built up tools and scripts over the years and inherently assume the behaviour of the command line doesn't change. Some businesses run on these things behind the scenes. I'm not even talking about scripts that haven't been migrated to PowerShell. I'm talking about scripts that haven't even been properly migrated to Windows yet. A lot of businesses are still reliant on the old DOS command line from before Windows NT. For the youngsters in the audience, Windows NT came before Windows 2000, which came before Windows XP. I'm sure you've heard of XP, right? Windows 95 and 98 were the consumer versions which ran parallel to NT but were actually based on DOS. We don't talk about Windows ME. If you work in IT and can't believe people are still reliant on such outdated technologies, just check your network for batch files with the extension .bat. If you've got any, and I know a lot of you do, then you're part of the reason we need this legacy stuff. .bat means the script is intended for the old 16-bit DOS world. Anything in NT or later should be using a .cmd extension. .bat scripts still work, but only thanks to backwards compatibility. This is why the Windows command prompt sucks. Even in Windows 10, it needs to behave like an obsolete operating system from the early 80s, because if Microsoft change it, it could wreak havoc across the globe. Of course, these days we have PowerShell. PowerShell is much more functional than the old command prompt and a giant leap forwards for the Windows command line. The thing is, PowerShell can't replace a command prompt because backward compatibility. So we have both. In fact, whilst PowerShell is massively more useful than the old command prompt, the user interface is exactly the same. What gives? Time for a quick terminology lesson here. The command line is actually composed of two distinct components. The bit you type into is called the terminal, and the back-end piece that does all the processing is called the shell. Sorry Linux peeps, I know that's a simplification and Windows now has a pseudo console as well, but for the purposes of this video we don't need that level of detail. This goes back to the early days of computers when people sat at a dumb terminal which was basically just a keyboard and monitor attached to a cable. The computer was separate. When you typed, the characters from your keyboard were sent to the computer. When the computer responded, it sent a stream of characters back to the terminal, which displayed them on the monitor. If you go back even further before monitors were common, then the terminal would output the character stream onto your printer instead. These days we don't have physical terminals, instead we have terminal applications which do the job of the physical terminals people used to sit at. The Windows command prompt you see on screen and interact with is actually a terminal program called the Windows console. It connects to a shell called the command prompt that does the actual processing. PowerShell is a much more modern shell on the back end, but the terminal application you're interacting with is still the same Windows console application. Okay. We know why the old shell needs to stick around, but why is the terminal app, the Windows console, not evolved? It has, actually. There have been a number of improvements over the years, but there's still that issue of backward compatibility. If Microsoft change it too much, stuff could break. If they do something that changes its performance, that could cause a critical system somewhere out in the world to go horribly wrong. seriously, that stuff happens. In steps the Windows terminal. This is a modern reimagining of what a command line terminal should be. Okay, maybe there's a little bit less imagination going on and a little bit more looking over the shoulder of Linux, but it's much more modern and much better than the old console. Just like PowerShell can't replace the command prompt for fear of breaking something though, the Windows terminal can't replace the Windows console for the same reason. So to get the Windows terminal, you grab it from the Microsoft Store for free and install it alongside the traditional console. This is just a terminal. It's a bit you type into and read text from. The default shell it connects to is PowerShell. I said default because it's not tied to a particular shell. You can use it to connect to PowerShell, the old command prompt, bash. Yup, you heard that right. If you did a double take in that last one, then go watch my video about running Linux inside Windows 10. The Windows terminal will automatically discover any Linux distributions installed in WSL and will add them to your new tab drop-down list as well. Because yes, the Windows terminal now supports tabs. No need to have a ton of command windows open, but that's only the beginning. You can customize just about every part of this terminal. You can change colors, create custom tab profiles, you can even split it into multiple panes. It's all controlled through a JSON settings file. Now there's loads you can do here, and walking through all of the options would get quite boring. I'll leave you to do that in your own time, and I'll put a link to the documentation in the video description for you. Instead, I'm going to quickly apply some settings I made earlier so you can see some of the possibilities here. The first thing you probably noticed is that the background of my PowerShell window turned blue and then translucent. There are a lot of graphical tweaks you can make to this to personalise your terminal. Some are just for fun, like the retro look I've given the old command prompt. Others are a bit more practical. You'll notice Ubuntu and Kali in the dropdown now have icons specific to those distributions, rather than a generic Tux the Penguin. If I open them, you can see I've applied a custom background image as well. So if I'm working with multiple tabs here, it's easier to keep track of which one I'm in. Again, if you're wondering how I'm running Ubuntu or Kali in Windows, go check out that Windows Subsystem for Linux video. I'll drop a link in the description if you missed it last time around. Just to confirm though, that is Kali Linux running on the Windows Linux kernel in WSL2. As well as graphical customizations, there are some interesting functional tweaks you can do as well to make life a little bit easier and improve your workflow. Take this Nextcloud profile for example. If I open that, it's not running in WSL. That's a separate Linux server in my lab. The profile I've created for it in the Windows terminal is connecting an SSH session so it behaves as a remote terminal to that server. Just to confirm, that's CentOS 7 using its normal Red Hat derived kernel. It's not running in WSL. You could do the same thing for Windows servers using remote PowerShell too. Speaking of PowerShell, you'll see I've created a few profiles for Office 365 and Exchange. If I open the Office 365 one, you'll notice a bit of initialization going on in the background. This profile is opening PowerShell, then running a script to connect up to various Office 365 services. So if you're an Office 365 admin, a profile like this could save you creating a bunch of remote connections manually and authenticating to all of them. Once this opens, I have direct access to Azure AD, Exchange Online and Teams, and of course it's your script, so you can add whatever services you want into it. The Exchange profiles I've created are similar, but I've used them to show off a different feature. As well as having multiple tabs, you can split a single tab into multiple panes, each with their own mini terminal. Unfortunately as yet, you cannot create a profile with multiple panes in it, but you can pass command line arguments to the terminal app to have it open with multiple panes. I've created an Exchange terminal shortcut that opens a single tab with two panes, one for Exchange Online and the other for Exchange Server. This sort of thing could be handy for someone who administers a hybrid Exchange infrastructure. These are all just examples of course. I'm not trying to provide an exhaustive list of customizations, more give you a flavour of what you could do. If you look online, you'll see some creative uses of terminal customization. It supports Unicode and custom fonts, so you can have smileys, icons and all sorts in it. Soon it will have support for clickable hyperlinks and rudimentary animations as well. If you find yourself using a lot of command line, particularly remote SSH or PowerShell management, there's potential for you to mold yourself a nice little time saver here with custom profiles. Now, I was specifically asked about performance. Is there any performance advantage to using the new Windows terminal over the old Windows console? There are definitely efficiency benefits to be had, but in terms of computing performance, yes, but probably no. Remember that the terminal is just an interface. All of the actual computation happens via the shell, and that hasn't changed, whether it be PowerShell, Bash, or the old command prompt. The new terminal does use GPU acceleration to draw its text, which allows it to be prettier, and in theory, I guess, faster. If you're one of the people who rushed out to buy a brand new RTX 3080, you can use that to accelerate text rendering in the Windows terminal. I'm not sure that justifies the purchase by itself though, and no telling your mum I said you need it for homework. In all honesty, the performance bottleneck is probably going to be the shell end and not the terminal. I do vaguely recall a script years ago that actually ran faster with the command prompt minimized because it didn't have to draw the text, but even dumping text out as fast as I couldn't see any performance difference between the old console and the new terminal on my current system. So I'd look at this more as a feature that will make your terminal prettier rather than something that will make your scripts faster. More efficient scripting and multi-threading is what will really make a difference to your script performance. Before I go, it would be remiss of me not to mention that the old Windows console does support some graphical customization too, hence why PowerShell normally opens with a blue window instead of a black one. Admittedly, it's nowhere near as customizable as the new terminal, but you can guarantee that if I don't mention it, someone in the comments will. Speaking of which, if you found a useful customization for the Windows terminal, let us know in the comments. While you're waiting for your fancy new terminal to download, why don't you go and check out one of these videos over here? It actually doesn't take very long to download, but you should watch those videos anyway, because YouTube said so. If you found this video useful, then give it a thumbs up before you go, and don't forget to subscribe for future videos. Thanks for watching guys, see you next time!